On that clear November day in 1961, the crew on board the Greek cargo ship Theo were on a routine crossing in the waters of the Bahamas when the second officer, Nikolaos Spakidakis, noticed something strange through his binoculars. A small raft floated in a blue expanse of sea. What the crew laid eyes on as they neared took even the most seasoned sailor's breath away. A fair-haired girl lay flopped over a small cork float, clinging for life. Her skin was blistered by the sun, her lips were chapped by thirst, her body temperature soared to a dangerous 105 degrees Fahrenheit, and her entire body was sunburned. But she was still breathing. Terry Jo Dupereau, 11, had drifted alone in the open ocean, without food or water, for nearly 4 days, becoming both a witness and a victim in what would prove to be one of the most shocking crimes of that era. A passing crew member took a photo of one moment when the man, a speck in an ocean void, reached the surface of his torment. Soon to be a widely witnessed event, the photo itself a prominent feature of headlines in the world newspapers. It started out as a typical family vacation. Dr. Arthur Dupereau was a successful ophthalmologist in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and had dreamed for years about taking a trip to see the beauty of the Bahamas with his wife, Jean, 38, and their 3 children, Brian, 14, Terry Jo, 11, and Renee, 7. They had been saving up for the trip for a long time. Eventually, they chartered a swanky 60-foot yacht named Bluebell. Leading the vessel was Julian Harvey, a 44-year-old war veteran who appeared to be the ideal man for the job. He was there with his wife, Mary Dean, his bride of just 4 months. The first several days of the trip were surreal. The family snorkeled around Great Abaco Island, gathering souvenir seashells from its white sandy shores. Dr. Dupereau even showed his plans to a local commissioner. They were going to come back for Christmas. No one could have predicted that Captain Harvey's friendly smile belied the beast within. He was on his 5th marriage, and all of his previous wives had died under questionable circumstances. His yachts and boats, always insured for sizable amounts, had a curious habit of sinking, while Harvey himself always managed to survive and cash in on the insurance payouts. On the night of November 12th, little Terry Jo went to bed early in their cabin. Little did she know this small decision would save her life. She woke in the middle of the night to the heart-wrenching screams of her brother. "Help, Daddy! Help!" 50 years later, she recalled in an interview with Fox News that it was a scream that tells you right away that something terrible is happening. As it turned out, it was that night Captain Harvey decided when he would execute his ghastly scheme. First, he murdered his wife, Mary, who he had just taken out a large insurance policy on. He intended to toss her body into the sea and claim that she'd accidentally gone overboard, but Dr. Dupereau happened to see the murder in progress. Harvey killed him too when he attempted to interfere. The rest of the family came running to the bedroom when they heard the noise, and Harvey could not leave any witnesses behind. When the terrified Terry Jo pulled herself onto the deck, she witnessed a nightmare in the making. Her mother and brother lay in pools of blood. Harvey shoved the girl bluntly into her cabin, where she curled up terrified on her bed. It wasn't long before she felt that there was a problem. The cabin was filling with water. To rid himself of his crime, Harvey had intentionally opened the sea valves to the ship, sinking the yacht. Just then, Harvey dashed the rope from the lifeboat to the girl. However, as Harvey's friend Richard Logan later learned, it was not an act of mercy. When he filled a pocket with food and saw the girl on deck, he understood. My God, she might live. She had to be killed, Logan said. While Harvey intended to murder the girl right as they reached for the rope, Terry Jo managed to drop it. Struggling against the waves and her own terror in pitch darkness, she finally managed to untie a small cork float moments before Bluebell sank. She was now alone in the middle of the ocean. Her real struggle to survive began shortly thereafter. The first night was the scariest. Waves smashed into the small raft, drenching Terry Jo to the bone. The salt water stung her skin, and the clammy cold wind sliced her through like a knife. She did not know in which direction she was drifting, but she held tightly to the almost weightless cork raft that she hoped was her salvation. Then, when the sun came up, there was a new problem: thirst. There was water all around her, and she couldn't have it. A salty crust formed on her lips, and they started to crack. She attempted to moisten them, but the salt merely intensified her thirst. By noon, the scorching sun had transformed the raft into a searing frying pan. Lacking any protection from the heat, her skin began to blister. To break the heat, she would sometimes dip her legs into the water. It provided some comfort, but each time she gazed into the deep dark beneath her, fear seized her. What was hiding underneath the surface? Once she spotted a fin moving close to her, and her heart almost stopped. But it wasn't a shark, it was dolphins. They swam around her raft for hours, as if guarding her. The temperature was plummeting at night, and Terry Jo was starting to shake. She tried to reposition herself, but the little raft was so delicate that any sudden movements could rip it apart. She learned to reposition her weight slowly, balancing on the tiny surface. Through long, endless hours, the stars above were her sole companions. Hunger had become intolerable by the end of the second day. Her stomach was cramped with pain. She saw small fish swim by, but there was no way to catch them. Sometimes she saw bits of seaweed floating by and wished that something edible lived there, but it was always out of range. On the third day, the hallucinations started. Her frazzled mind began to play cruel tricks. She thought she could hear her parents calling her name. Islands came into view, but when she attempted to paddle towards them, they vanished. At one point, she was sure there was a ship on the horizon and attempted to scream, but her dry throat could not produce a sound. The worst parts, though, were when the ocean went completely still, when the water was as flat as glass and the sun made a desert out of everything. Time seemed to stop. No motion, no sound, just the unceasing blue extending in all directions. Terry Jo started questioning whether there was a world outside of this watery jail. Harvey had already been discovered in a lifeboat on November 15th, the body of little Renee beside him. He spun a dramatic tale for authorities about a sudden storm and a fire on board. He said he had heroically attempted to rescue passengers, that he had pulled the girl's body from the water and made a desperate attempt to bring her back to life. Everyone trusted the fearless captain, a war veteran with an allegedly untarnished record. When Terry Jo was at last hoisted aboard the Theo, she was too weak to stand. Her skin was blistered with bad sunburns. Bile covered her mouth and cheeks, and her clothes had stiffened with salt. Her body temperature had soared to a dangerous 105 degrees Fahrenheit. Later, doctors said that if they had found her only a few hours later, she wouldn't have made it out of the ocean. Terry Jo remained in a Miami hospital for a week, recovering from severe dehydration and sunburns. The police finally got a chance to talk to the brave girl 7 days after her rescue, and the truth about that horrible night came out. Harvey was staying at a motel in Florida. He learned the news of Terry Jo's survival while listening to the radio. The murderer turned pale and, stammering, murmured, "My God, that's just wonderful." The next day, he was discovered dead in the bathroom of his motel room. He had slit his own throat. The investigation revealed a shocking pattern of crimes by Harvey. It emerged that he had narrowly avoided being prosecuted in the death of one of his former wives. His yachts and boats had a suspicious habit of sinking, always to very lucrative insurance payouts. But this time, his plan had unraveled. He had not counted on the strength of a little girl. In October 1982, a memorial plaque dedicated to the Dupereau family was erected at Fort Howard Memorial Park in Wisconsin. It reads, "In memory of the family of Arthur Dupereau, lost off the Bahamas on November 12, 1961. They will forever be found in their loved ones' hearts, resting with the one who is eternal life. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." Terry Jo said she did not speak for decades about the nightmare she had experienced. In the 1980s, she began to tell her story to close friends. That prompted her to seek psychological help and ultimately to co-author the book Alone, Orphaned on the Ocean with Richard Logan. She recalled in an interview, almost 50 years later, as I stood at a book signing, something amazing took place. We were signing books last month, and some of my former teachers, people I worked with 49 years ago, came simply to check on me. They said they wished they could talk with me or help me back then. Back then, survivors were told to pretend that nothing happened. That experience transformed her perspective on life permanently. You either break it or you make it stronger when you spend 4 days alone with the ocean, she said later. And that one should never give up regardless of how hopeless the situation looks. Because hope is always there, you just don't always see who from. Even after going through her perilous ordeal at sea, Terry Jo, now Terry Fastbender, is still working with water today. I was never afraid, she said. I was an outdoors child and I loved the water. I had strong faith. I had faith in God and prayed for Him to extend help to me. And I just went with the flow. Her story has become an inspiration of the amazing power of the human spirit and of survival. I knew I was saved for a reason, she said, but it took me 50 years to get the courage to tell my story and offer hope to others. And somewhere in the dark waters of the Bahamas, Bluebell still lies, a silent witness to one of the most extraordinary survival stories and most brutal crimes in maritime history.